you, Ryan. Appreciate it. I know that we still have a lot of activity in the back, so if you are having any problem being able to hear us, feel free to come on up. We don't bite, we promise, and we'd love for this to be a true conversation with you here this afternoon. So thank you for being here for our panel, Mindful Leadership and Leading with Heart and Mind for Healthcare Leaders. My name is Temmerman. I am currently the Chief Experience Officer with NGA Healthcare Consulting. We are a small consulting group based out of the Bay Area. I focus a fair amount of my work on patient experience, but I have over the last decade or so, also some supply chain and other realms that actually Nick Gaich down at the other end of the panel here is involved with as well. Additionally, I am the chapter president here for 2017 for CAHL, California Association of Healthcare Leaders, and so really excited to see all of you here today in partnership with this event. So we're here for this panel to talk about mindful leadership. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend to know how to define that. I find that for myself it's a constant learning process, but next to me I have three incredible individuals who have graciously volunteered to share their journeys in learning about mindful leadership and how they share it with others. So I look forward to learning from their expertise here this afternoon. But to start us out, I do want to put out on the table, I think all of us have a sense of what mindfulness is. We think of very Zen things, Buddhist practices, we think of yoga, we think of other forms of meditation and how to mitigate the stress and the strain and the chaos of each day. But what is mindful leadership? That's what we really want to discuss here this afternoon. Certainly, the things I just talked about 30 seconds ago are a part of that, but there's so much more in terms of effective leadership and how do you provide that sense of serving others that you work with and serving those that work for you. And here we are in healthcare, serving patients, serving families. So mindful leadership is something that I think words like selfless, effortless, letting the experience unfold itself, and within that being able to be adaptive, being able to be innovative, while all at the same time self-managing. These are some things that we'll be talking about today, and I look forward to hearing what the panel wants to share as it relates to some of the questions that we prepared here, and then certainly getting questions from all of you. So really quickly, I'll just share a little bit about why I was so interested in being a part of this panel, and then I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to do their introductions, and we'll dive into questions. I came into healthcare in a roundabout way, but I knew I would be in healthcare in some form or another. What I never experienced in my healthcare professional development and career is the fact that I would constantly be reminded at various points in my career personally and through my family and through others just how important it is to be cognizant of the fact that we're all vulnerable working in healthcare. 7-8 years ago now, I became very ill myself and had to step away from my job with an academic medical center for 6 months in order to get the appropriate care and be able to return to work. My father, who was also a physician, passed of early onset Alzheimer's, and I watched as myself and other members of my family who have worked in healthcare lifelong were stumped and baffled by the very system that we work in. We couldn't even figure out how to work the system most effectively for ourselves. And I now, as caretaker for my husband after a horrific accident last fall, find myself repeating a lot of these same kinds of realizations that I had before. And what it's also left me with is the realization that the only way I'm going to get through all of that is to be cognizant of what everyone else is going through along the way. That is the way I'm going to be able to provide the best care I can for my husband and for my family. And ultimately, that's what we're all doing here in healthcare. So thank you for letting me share a little bit about that. I find that storytelling is very personal and something that sometimes we're prepared for and sometimes we're not prepared for in healthcare, although it's filled with stories. But I think it makes an experience like what we have here this afternoon even more memorable and more meaningful for all of us coming together. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to give their more personal introductions, and then we'll dive into some questions. I've actually, after the introductions here, we've got a question out to you guys that will kind of start us off with. So, Jeremy, I'll ask you to start.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you. First, thank you to Laura for all the work she put into making this panel happen. There's a lot of things that went on behind the scenes that really helped. And then, where did he go? He's gone. Ryan, thank you to you too. So, in any case, I'm Associate Professor of Practice at the Drucker School of Management in Claremont, and I'm also the founding director of the Executive Mind Leadership Institute, also at the Claremont Graduate University. And for the last 14 years, I've been teaching mindfulness and awareness practices to executives, following Peter Drucker. Just out of curiosity, how many people know who Peter Drucker is? Right? He's considered to be the founding father of the discipline of management. And one of his core axioms is that you can't manage anything else unless you manage yourself first. And yet, where do we learn how to manage ourselves? And first and foremost in that, learning how to manage our own mind. I have, like Laura, I think we come to this work for our own personal experiences. And when I was 20, I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disease that the prognosis of organ failure was 90% within 5 years. And so I got a first-hand advanced education in how to deal with uncertainty on a daily basis for 17 years. And in the end, had a kidney transplant in 2008. 13 of my former students came forward as donors, including my donor, who was one of my students. So, to make a long story short, in education, we teach people technical skill and assume that's going to be enough, and where we don't have a lot of support is how do you deal with the humanity of being a professional, given uncertain situations, resource reductions, constant pressure and stress and responsibility, and the need to perform well. How do you manage yourself in that sort of circumstance? And helping people do that is what I do. So, great.
Thank you. I'm Greg Maynard. I'm a clinical professor of medicine at UC Davis here in town. I'm the chief quality officer there. Part of that, I was practicing hospitalist and division chief of hospital medicine at UC San Diego. So I'm a relative rookie in the mindfulness game. I don't have as dramatic stories as these people have. I was struck by the tragedy of male pattern baldness relatively early. But I think I first used mindfulness and started thinking about it as a clinician educator because we saw so many patients in the hospital that were thrust into our life and us into theirs with end-of-life situations, with critical decision-making, very stressful situations day in, day out. And I saw some teams would walk in the room and walk back out and never talk about it, and others, I think the people I respected the most, would stop, take a pause, talk about what had just happened, debrief, and things like that. And so that was sort of my beginning to really think about using that as a good tool to provide insight and teaching. As chief quality officer, I use it now more in terms of, I think it goes through all threads. We'll be talking about this, I'm sure, of quality and safety. Teamwork, conflict resolution, patient safety culture, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It tends to show up aspects of that critical self-reflection, of that stopping and taking a pause, run throughout all those things. So that's sort of my take on that.
I get this word. So my name is Gaich, and for those that know Laura well, you can tell how fortunate a person I am as far as having the opportunity to work with Laura shoulder to shoulder now for many years. By way of background, I retired from Stanford, I think it's in 2012, privilege to work with great minds at the table on a day-to-day basis. In the first 18 of those years, I was over at the hospital side, where I was vice president for the supply chain, and also service line administrator for orthopedics and sports medicine. And to show my age, for a few years, I was also responsible for, at the time, customer service. Probably more generally seen as a patient experience. My last 7 years at Stanford, before I retired, I moved over to the School of Medicine and had an opportunity to actually help stand up an independent center at the university that related to our clinical research activities, specifically translational research. And I retired as an assistant dean. Mindfulness is actually very personal for me as well. Back in 2012, my mom's health condition was changing very rapidly. And I remember very vividly one night in the hospital room at Stanford with the family, having to make some tough decisions on where we were going to go as far as the course of care over the next several years. And it was real clear for the family and for myself that at that point I needed to retire at Stanford and take care of mom and the family based on what we had going in front of us. It was about a year and a half into that journey when it was also very clear that to help support my mom through her final days, we also had to support ourselves and the family that was taking care of her. And based on a counseling session, we actually entered into a mindfulness-based stress reduction program that I took for about 3.5 months, which turned to be life-altering, not only for myself, but I was able to take it with my daughter, who was 38. So the experience that really brought mindfulness to bear was really based on urgency and based on the need of taking care of both my mom and family. It turned out that it has transitioned the way I not only see myself at a personal level, but more importantly is how do I translate the essence of what I am as an individual into the work setting. So I'm really encouraged to really have this as a panel today, and I'm hoping to share what I can to you on a very personal level. And more importantly, what I've learned in the past really several years as relates to transition of mindfulness-based programs into conscious leadership, and really speaking to more the human condition side of what we do day in and day out. So I appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you to all three of you for sharing your stories and a bit about your paths on this. Before we dive into some of the questions that we put together and talked through as a panel up here, I actually wanted to see if we can get a little bit of a pulse check from each of you. And Eric or Ryan, I don't know if we might be able to, even now, use the microphones for people to share a few responses to this question we're about to share. This session is being recorded, so if you're able to share comments and questions with the mic, that's helpful for capturing it. But the question we have to you before we kind of dive in on this is, what would each of you like to get out of this time here together this afternoon? We have prepared stories and questions to talk through, but we also want to make sure that we're giving to this group what you guys would like to get out of it. You made a conscious decision to take a seat here and join us, and so we want to make sure we're cognizant of that. So what do you guys want to hear about or get out of this session?
Don't be bashful.
We don't bite.
Right.
So one thing I'm interested in is being interested in the concept, but not knowing how to go from where I currently am to whatever it is. So kind of knowing how to understand more and how to make mindfulness more of a daily practice and more of a thing that's in life, but not knowing how to get from point A to point B.
Thank you. Others? Annie,
Hi,
want to
everyone. Yeah, so really, I guess leadership to me is really very personal. And I think I would want to sort of hear from the panel in terms of when we go through our sort of day-to-day, it's very hard to not get sort of roped up at what sort of our I guess like the fire of the day is. And so how do you stay calm and stay grounded, really remember what leadership is and really what you want it to be, and how do you sort of like keep that in mind?
Thank you. Are there one or two others who want to share anything? One up here.
So I try to practice mindfulness in my personal life, and to me, that meant slowing down, doing one thing at a time, not four things at a time, really being fully present in the moment. That flies in the face of what I do in my professional life, which is, manage a large department, 100 employees, multiple meetings, emails going all day long, and wanting to be fully present and give my time to my leaders so that I can develop them. So how do you do that and still keep your job?
My question is, I am fairly young in my career, so this is more, it kind of plays off what she said, which is how do you balance mindfulness and growth when you're in the growth phase of your career, and where is the role of that, and what is the applicability of it?
So I am selfishly looking for additional information. Our fall conference, the entire fall conference theme is mindfulness in the midst of disruption. And I'm looking to have an entire track about mindfulness and different type of exercise and things that we can do. So I'm selfishly looking for more information on that, about speakers and who we can bring to the next conference, because it's like the opening to what we want to do here more at HFMA when it comes to this topic.
Great, thank you. Anyone else before we dive in? Okay.
Just one thing to add on to the last comment. I'm wondering if we know ways you can bring it into an organization. Has anyone looked at best practices, for example, of how they're introducing this in environments like Google and still remaining effective as an organization, as professionals in an organization? I think that would be an excellent concept to bring to the
Can you repeat the very last part? It's actually, I don't know why it's very pink to us to hear it here.
Sorry, is that better?
Yes.
Yes.
Right.
I was saying if the panel can share any best practices they know of how organizations can take this on so that it makes it easier for individuals to walk that in the organization. And I was saying that places like Google, I think, are a good example of how they're still managing to be a high growth organization and still bring in those practices so that it doesn't feel like it's disruptive.
Great question, thank you. Thank you all for taking a few moments to share like that. It's certainly very helpful for us and quite a breadth of topics, so I think it's very exciting for us. What I'd like to do is to jump into a pretty broad question, and Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to take the point on starting us off with this, and that is around what is mindfulness and what is mindful leadership, and perhaps just as importantly, what is it not?
Okay, great. It's interesting, nobody asked that question. How many people have taken a mindfulness class? How many people have heard of mindfulness but not so sure what it is? Okay. How many people attended this session at the urging of your spouse who desperately wanted you to know mindfulness? So, we tend to think, I'm sure everybody in this room would advocate for physical fitness and exercising our body, right? But how many of us advocate for mental or emotional fitness and not almost immediately attach that to something that's weird, woo-woo, or out there? Right? And in starting this 15 years ago, nobody was interested in mindfulness, honestly. So it was about how do you help leaders who are in high-pressured situations that weren't necessarily going to sign up for a mindfulness class or walk into an ashram understand the essential nature of how to manage what goes on in their head, and how does that translate into their belief system, the choices they perceive, the action they take, and ultimately the result they get. And so, to answer ahead of time, the question of what is mindful leadership is a kind of cultivation of awareness, of understanding, how do you get these results? And are these results you wanted? And if they weren't results you wanted, what was the chain of events that happened inside that got you there? And were you aware of that? So I've had the great pleasure of working with any number of different professions, but quite a lot in the medical profession. And thinking of one fellow who's a kind of star physician at the University of Virginia Medical Center. And he said, you know, I've come to this because I realized I basically bully my way around the hospital. And I know that's not good. And I can see the look of terror on young residents' faces when they see me coming down the hallway. And the last thing I want to be thought of is somebody who was, a terrorist in his own organization. I know I have a temper, and I know that's not the best way to deal with the challenges that come at me. And so, from our point of view, in teaching, mindful leadership is about cultivating the awareness of what's going on inside you. How does that translate into action? How does actions translate into results? And are those results the ones you intended? And if not, how do you need to transform that dynamic? Right? So it's a very different sort of take than mindfulness equals meditation. Mindfulness equals going off to the mountaintop. Mindfulness equals removing yourself from the action of the world. Right? And in fact, the way I was trained was mindfulness was being thrown into these totally nutso situations and saying, okay, now perform. Right? So for example, one teacher I worked with would give us $100 at 11 o'clock in the morning. There were 40 other people in the group, and said, by 1 o'clock, have lunch on the table for everyone in the group. That was it. No recipe, no food. It's Northern California, so nobody eats anything normal. Right? This person's allergic to water. This person can only eat things that start with the letter R. And you're stuck with 6 other people, and you have to make lunch, right? And so you got to figure out what are you going to make, who's going to make it. Somebody hates being in the kitchen. Somebody's a control freak and loves being in the kitchen. You got to go buy the food. You got $100, and 1:30, your deadline's coming. So in that moment, what's happening in your mind? Right? Oh gosh, I'm stuck with this jerk again. I hate this guy. I got stuck with him last time. What if it's going to taste bad? What's the group going to think? Right? All of this stuff that goes on in an organizational setting got reproduced in this seemingly innocent little make lunch for everybody with $100. So that's how I approach. So when you're talking about how do I do this in my daily life, it's not an add-on. It's just remembering to check what's going on in my mind right now. The phone rings, it's your most difficult client or your most difficult colleague. What happens in your body? What's the story in your head? What's the emotion you're experiencing? And how is that gonna affect the next moment when you pick up the phone to answer it? And what is the tone of voice going to be? Or do you just let it go to voicemail and hope they don't call back? Right? So, bringing mindfulness into an organization is really about watching yourself with clarity about what you're actually experiencing right now. And can you step back from that? Can you reel it in? Sometimes on the fly, maybe not always on the fly. But how do you reel it in so that your intention of why did you get this job in the first place? Why did you move into this profession in the first place? How can you act from that original intention? So those are some things. So for me, mindfulness is a capacity you overlay onto what you're already doing, and then you start from there. And so that means any opportunity is an opportunity to practice. I work with a group of attorneys, and we use their attorney difficult client interaction as their training. When do they move into judgment? When do they move into frustration? How do they reel back from that? One of the firms I work with, one of the partners pulls me into the corner office that they use as a lounge, and they said, "This is before we started working with you. This is what we called our old meditation room." And he turns around and opens this cabinet that's filled with exquisite alcohol. He said, "This is how we meditated before." Because the only way they could regulate their nervous system was through alcohol, right? It didn't pass me by that the first thing I was given when I came here was a drink ticket, but I thought that was funny. But we do have ways to regulate ourselves in the professions, and it is almost always through alcohol, right? Because it's socially accepted to a point. And yet we know what kind of damage that can do. But I've seen it through every profession I work with, whether it's financial services or law or medicine. So I think what this offers is not some woo-woo craziness, but rather some much more sophisticated tools on how you manage the stuff in your head to perform better and to live better. And I think, as everybody mentioned, it's not just about at work. It's almost always with your kid or with your spouse and with the rest of your family. And Thanksgiving dinner's going to come up, and how's that going to go this year? And how do you manage those experiences as well? So I don't want to go on, but maybe that's one way to answer your question.
No, I think that's great. I'd love to ask Greg and Nick to share some of your experiences in bringing this into your organizations. What were some of the challenges that you personally experienced in trying to do that? And what challenges did you notice others around you experiencing with your trying to bring this into the organization or trying to role model it?
We don't have a mindfulness center per se. A lot of feedback here. But I think the concepts that go into mindfulness are in many, many aspects of what we're trying to accomplish at the medical center and beyond, in both personal levels and at leadership levels. So when I think of mindfulness, I go back to the writings of Ron Epstein. And I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this guy, but he was one of the first influential writers where I picked this up when I was mainly a clinician educator. I found his writings very useful. Basically, talk about one of the cores of mindfulness is this ongoing self-reflection, this critical self-appraisal that you're doing all the time. You're multitasking, but every once in a while you'll take a deep breath and go, wow, I'm really getting kind of stressed out about this, I need to take a second. Or you'll be talking with someone and you'll realize that you're getting hot and bothered and you're getting mad, you want to kick this in on that guy. And you stop and say, why does this person always push my buttons? It's stopping to ask that instead of just getting mad and escalating. And reflecting about what maybe you're pushing their button too, or maybe you have a different personality type. So there's a lot that goes into this mindfulness from my perspective. It's curiosity about what's making things happen. That's really an undying well. It's wondering what sort of this obsession with when things go wrong or almost go wrong. How did that happen? And you go back and think about the way you make decisions and the way administrations and groups make decisions. And basically, you have input that's facts and knowledge and things that you can draw decision trees for that are very logical, but you also have all these other things that are coming in at you. Your perception, your past experience, your emotions, the way somebody's dressed, all these things, what somebody else told you. All those things are also influencing your decision. And in order not to be too reactive and, for instance, make a false diagnosis because somebody in the ED told you that somebody has X, when you see the patient, you realize that you might be biased because they told you what they have already, and you need to step back and make sure you don't jump to that conclusion and start over. It's being aware of those things that can lead you down the wrong path. So in the organization, I think this kind of stopping and thinking about why you're making these decisions, and not when you don't want to be strictly reflexive or reactive, it is taking time to stop and think. That's a common thread through so much in healthcare. If you think about the huddles, the timeout, if you think about things like, ways you build teamwork, you stop, you say their name, you introduce yourself. Rules for professionalism, rules for running committees, those things are all really ways to try to build mindfulness. I think that's a common sort of thread that runs through those things. So I kind of look at this as a common theme that it's probably the most efficient way to get to a lot of those things about changing patient safety culture, improving teamwork, and so on. Maybe we should change at UC Davis the thinking about mindfulness. I think the danger is some people hear mindfulness and, like you said, they go right to the granola yoga, and they don't want to. They don't envision themselves as being that way. And yet, most of them will agree that if they can stop and reflect about what's making them the way they are, what's making them think the way they think, it really does help, and it takes a lot of the conflict out of things when you're stopping to. I used to be real hot-headed, right? So until I started tackling this stuff, I don't think I was able to control that sometimes. I'm much better able to do that and have a sense of humor about it and be self-deprecating about my own fallibilities when you see the things that trigger your reactions that are beyond the intellect, these other triggers for the things that you do. So anyway, I think it takes role modeling, it takes training. So much of this training that we try to do that is in so many different areas of healthcare, I think this might be more efficient to teach it this way. And then maybe those other things would just happen.
So I should probably disclose, I am a product of the 60s, so meditation is not something that's foreign to me. Just to make sure that grounding everybody here. But let me first start off by saying a few things, what it's not. And I agree with my panelists. Mindfulness and the practice of mindfulness is not a bolt-on, it's really a bolt-in. And it's a very personal relationship as far as how you self-center yourself using very simple techniques that allow you to be sharp and focused based on not being judgmental at the time. So really, what does that translate to? For those that raise their hand that have taken a mindfulness-based program, can I see those hands again? I'm guessing that probably the underpinning behind that was from the kind of founder of bringing mindfulness into the healthcare setting, which was John Kabat-Zinn. So for those that have not had any readings or had a chance to read John Kabat-Zinn, that's definitely a recommendation. I believe he started this back in the 80s, working with patients with extreme pain. Most sensitive patients at the hospital at that point in time had a hard time treating and curing. Let me just read to you his definition of it, just to maybe level set, Laura, and then I can maybe help give you some personal experiences and how I translated that. But this was done some time ago, but this is the way John Kabat-Zinn defines mindfulness practices, is paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So what you heard really from the panelists is actually what I agree with. It's all about focus and awareness and really keeping a very sharp mind. And yes, meditation is a part of what you can do as far as the tools and the techniques, but it's not the meditation that you're thinking about as far as putting yourself into a clear spot, maybe letting some incense around you, although all those things are wonderful. It's using a very simple breathing technique that allows you to pause and reflect at the time that you truly need that. So what does that mean as far as in a work setting? give you maybe some examples that may help. There are ways from a strategic leadership perspective that we all have to challenge ourselves with as relates to the 20 meetings you have during the course of the day, plus the other scheduled initiatives that are on your plate. How do you clearly and very carefully separate the practical side of what you have to do as a professional to the professional side of who you are as a leader? And what I'd ask you to think through as you hear the discussion continue from a leadership perspective, what mindfulness-based practice will allow you to do, again, is to relax yourself to a point that you're in the moment at any given time during a situation that requires you as a central leader to step up as a central leader. And we've talked about some of the techniques, the mindfulness-based practice that we'll bring into your workplace, but it is certainly a conscious effort. It takes some courage to bring it into your organization. But you have tools and opportunities to be successful with that. But I think it's helpful to be clear that it's not what you believe as relates to the meditation practices that are wonderfully put together and wonderful for yourself on a personal basis. This is really a way to have a sharp, clear mind and being very genuine and authentic of who you are as a leader in every interaction you have during the course of the day. And it causes you to somewhat pause and reflect on yourself, and more importantly, what content are you bringing to that meeting or that initiative from a leadership perspective that allows you to have clear thinking, so the distractions of the 110 emails that you should be doing or the dual meetings that you have set during the course of the day, the reality is you have a responsibility to be present in the moment, for either that patient encounter or for that strategic meeting or that budget planning session, whatever may come down the road. So you're fully aware that that's the moment I'm in. I'm going to give this 100% attention, and then from that point, I'm going to allow myself to pause and reflect before I enter the next session. So that does require some operating changes, organization to be able to do that. You can start out certainly in very small levels of the organization and build it up. I'd really like to say that at this point, although the mindfulness practice, and we talked about that at lunch, is starting to gain much more traction as far as its relevance in the organization, at some level it's still a ground war. You need to take control of what you can locally and then look to expand it based on your own success. So that's kind of what it's not to me, more importantly what it is, and then we can talk a little bit more about what the audience would like to hear as far as how do you incorporate those practices into what you do as a professional day in, day out. And more importantly, how do you leave the day feeling very good from a conscious leadership perspective? You were totally in the moment and gave everything you could for the individuals that you're serving for that moment in time, based on who you are as a central leader.
Thank you all three of you for sharing this. My next question that I want to put out there for you is sort of two different tracks. So if you prefer to go down one and then with all three of us and then come back, that's fine, or each of you take on both. Just go with what you prefer. But I'm curious to hear each of you talk a little bit about best practices on that personal level. And Nick was just touching on some of this for you yourself in your professional role day to day in feeling a synergy with your leadership capacity. And then the other trajectory with this that I'm curious to hear you each talk about is how do you see yourself in an organization to either help with the role modeling for this, to help instill it in others, or to provide the opening for others to be just as courageous, or if it's more of a platform level in an organization around training. But it's one track of this is for you personally, because we all have to have that sense of feeling it in order to exude that for yourself and for others. But then as individuals who already see the benefit of this, how do we role model that and provide that hand extended out to others to help them come along this way too?
Good, you want to start?
Well, there are a lot of things you can do. There are a lot of things I do. One is just an inquiry. Like, how am I feeling right now? It took me a long time to realize what tired felt like, because I didn't know. One of my students, the head of nursing for a large hospital, said that she she kind of made her career on being able to power through anything. And then about halfway through the class, she wrote me a letter saying, I started to realize, first of all, I hate you, and I started to realize that the 7 major diagnoses of my life, 3 of which were cancer and 4 of which are autoimmune diseases, may be connected to the fact that I've been ignoring my body. She says, I exercise it and I feed it well, but I never listen to it. And I realized that, oh, it's been talking to me for a long time. That the tingling sensation in my fingers wasn't just an accident. Maybe that was the early stages of rheumatoid arthritis talking to me. The tingling, the pain I started to feel in my chest, right? So simply just asking, how am I feeling? 1. At the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day, spend 5 or 10 minutes just letting your attention go back and forth in your body, noticing how you're feeling. In interactions, writing an email or picking up the phone, what's the best possible outcome that could come from this? And is the nasty thing I want to write right now going to get me there? Right? So, again, it doesn't have to be about meditation, although I don't think any of us are going to dissuade you from doing that. But I guess what I want to say is don't feel like you can't not practice mindfulness if you don't feel like you want to dedicate yourself to a meditation practice. You don't have to. It's not during your... anyway, I can keep talking about it. Please.
I agree that you don't have to, I think basically you just have to try to do it. You know, pick times and take a deep breath and center yourself. That's all it really is. And ask yourself, you know, before you go into the exam room or before you go into a boardroom or before you have a critical conversation, how am I feeling? What's going to go in this decision? What are the things they might be feeling? And really, you know, asking yourself these questions as you're going into it, not in such a meditative way, almost like almost like a dance sort of way. Your mind can really move in a lot of different directions. And some people make this sound like it's a static, calm thing where you don't feel anything. To me, it's not that at all. You feel all these things. It's just that you acknowledge and are aware that you're feeling those things. And you ask yourself why you're feeling those things. And you see if you can use that and make sure you're not letting it influence your decisions in a bad way, but maybe use it in a good way. So that's the sort of day-to-day how I handle it. To try to just practice daily doing that sort of thing. In terms of putting it into the institution, those sorts of things, I just think it's part and parcel of so much of the other training we do that's not labeled mindfulness. So we're injecting that into dyads, we call them value teams, where we have nurse physician dyads on each unit. We try to put that into daily huddles. We try to, you know, when we do root cause analysis or when we're looking at errors, and we're trying to think about what was in that moment, how could we have been more mindful at that moment when it happened? How do we get people to pause and be mindful during these critical situations at a critical point in time? All those things come up all the time in quality and safety. So I think it's trying to acculturate that, make it acceptable to be vulnerable, make it good to be vulnerable almost, to realize that everybody makes mistakes as they do, and to get people to slow down at the critical points of decision making or when it's important to a patient or important to your organization.
So the wandering mind is a kind of a central tenet, right? In trying to understand, as humans we're wired, our minds wander. I mean, when we talk about multitasking, I think I just latest survey I read that women are able to multitask at a 5-to-1 ratio, and us guys we do about 1.5 as far as our capabilities. And of course, what we're all learning from research is that from a work productivity perspective, that's the worst thing we could be doing. Again, Absolutely, the worst thing we can do as far as accuracy and prediction of who we are, as far as delivering work. And of course, mindfulness is just an approach that allows us to actually circumvent that need to multitask based on the urgencies you have based on your schedule. But from a wandering mind perspective, it does give you an opportunity to understand that as our mind wanders, and as we sit here today, our mind's probably wandering in 4 directions, is that we recognize that. We don't judge it, and we don't try to suppress it. We just recognize that I'm in a mindfulness conference today, right now, and I'm thinking about my 10 emails that I didn't do 10 minutes ago. So when you start to recognize that your mind's wandering, you just pull it back into center, you let it go for a while, and you get back into the present moment. And that's a discipline that you have to learn to. And I have to tell you, when I started out taking the mindfulness classes, I almost had to schedule, which I did, mindfulness check-ins on my calendar to make sure that I could actually have the time afforded to be able to take the pressure off myself to do a mindful check-in. It takes me about 3 minutes to help kind of recenter where I'm going. But it's as silly as it sounds, to be able to reinforce the discipline of allowing my simple breath to be able to soften the bloater of the day and to allow my mind to be sharp and not be distracted based on potentially the next meeting that I'm walking into. I schedule those on my calendar so I would take the pause in the moment to do that. Is it doable? Absolutely. Could we give ourselves 3 minutes times maybe 4 times a day to do that? Absolutely. What has happened over time is that natural rhythm has just fallen into place. So it's not something that I now need to be scheduling as far as my practice of mindfulness. It's a part of what I do every day. And I can do that while I'm walking to the next meeting. I can do that as a debriefing from the session, and there's ways and techniques that you can actually organizationally allow that to occur based on how you schedule meetings, what's important at the meetings, etc. But from a perspective of looking at mindfulness as a centering approach, it's just recognizing the fact that as humans, our minds are wired to wander, and that's okay, it's going to happen. Don't fight that. Don't try to judge it. Just bring it back to a place that you can let go for the time that you're in and spend your time and attention with the individuals that you're in front of right now. So the idea, be a recurring theme of being practicing in the moment and be respectful of the moment that you're in is what it's really all about. And there's ways you can do that to not only translate that behavior into yourself, but more importantly, how you cascade that behavior into the organization. Talk a lot about cascading, right? Connecting and cascading. And I know values sometimes seems to be a soft subject as far as its tangible value, but for me, culture is everything in an organization. And there's nothing soft about working in a culture that's hard. It takes time and energy to be able to break that culture. And it starts with your values at a personal level, which translates into your behaviors, and your behaviors translate into your actions. And your actions are really who you are as an organization, and more importantly as an individual. So having the courage to recognize the need for mindfulness-based practices and how it relates to you personally and how you translate that into profession is a responsibility that you will all take if you decide to go down that journey. And there's ways to do that.
Fantastic, thank you.